I believe we are still will now declare the meeting. We definitely have a quorum. We have all board members present and accounted for. So we will begin the agenda. Thank you, everybody, for being here on this lovely Thursday afternoon. Are there any additions to the agenda?
We just had that one requested change in order.
Yes, we will be reversing the order. If everyone would look at their agenda briefly, we're going to be doing number 8 on the agenda in place of number 7. We're just going to switch those two around in order to accommodate someone who will not be able to be here for the whole meeting. So that is the only change to the agenda that I know of. Seeing no additions to the agenda, we'll move on to the election of a vice chair. So at this time, the chair would entertain nominations for vice chair of the State Board of Elections.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would like to nominate our fellow board member, Malcolm Funn, to be vice chair of the State Board of Elections. He, along with yourself, has the most experience among us, and that's a critical component to the continuity and integrity of our board with the departure of PJ Hogan. And I'm confident that Mr. Funn can lead us well. And so I would like to nominate him to become the vice chair of the State Board of Elections.
Thank you very, very, very much, Mrs. Woodward. Do we have a second to that nomination?
Second.
So we have a nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, all those in favor of Malcolm, well, I guess I should ask, Mr. Funn, are you willing to accept the nomination for vice chair?
Yes, I'm willing. I thank you for your vote of confidence. I will do the best I can to my ability, and when I can't, then I'll lean on the rest of you.
And I might say that I have thoroughly enjoyed and found it a joy to learn from and work with Malcolm over the last year and a half, and I look forward to working with him as chair. I think he's the right person for the job at a time as this. But I'm going to close the nominations then and say all those in favor of Malcolm Funn serving as vice chair signify by saying aye.
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 So we have unanimously, Mr. Funn, welcome to the vice chair position.
Well, Well, thank you. I was a little taken back after the last meeting, realizing that after about 4 years, I was a senior person here. It's kind of daunting.
Yes,
So we've got a lot of work ahead of us with it coming, so we're going to lean heavily on the staff.
yes, we will. We will. Okay, so with that complete, item number 3, let's move to item number 4, which is the approval of the minutes. It's all been distributed in advance to the open and the closed meetings. Did everyone have a chance to review that? And if so, do you have any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes as presented? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes for both the open and the closed session, since there were no discussion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is
Second.
there a second?
Second.
Great. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. We move to our administrator's report.
So Donna, do you want to go ahead and start off?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Board, Mr. New Vice Chairman, I am thrilled to introduce to you the new election director, or the Director of Election Management and Reform, Melissa Dorsey. She's coming to us from the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and has a legal background, has background in ADA requirements and anti-discrimination laws, and we're excited to have her on board. Melissa, would you like to say a word or two?
Sure, thanks, Donna. I'm entering my second week here at SBE, and I'm just really excited to be a part of the team. I've been in state service for just a little bit under 8 years, and I'm really excited for this new role.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So as we've done in the past at the chairman's request, we are just going to highlight things that are in the administrator's report that we think maybe are, just draw your attention to. Just want to remind everybody that the Mayo conference and biennial conference that we've been talking about for a long time, it's next month. So we're eager to have your participation. Wanted just a shout out to Mary Wagner, who's been trying to coordinate this between us and Mayo, and she's done a great job. But we look forward to seeing all of you in Ocean City next month. Jen, are you on the line? Do you want to?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. If you just want to give
Thank you very much.
visibility.
Yes, I apologize to the board. I'm having a little bit of computer difficulties. I'm out of state right now, but hopefully this will come through. I just wanted to, we're covering the request for mail-in ballot form. I wanted to introduce, we have the two people who have been working on our usability study, Catherine Summers, PhD and Director of the Doctoral Program in User Experience and Research and Director of the School of User Research at University of Baltimore, as well as Tasman Swanson with the Center for Civic Design and the Director of Programs for Baltimore Vote. They're going to present the changes that we are proposing.
Great, thank you. And then with that, I will turn it on over to Mary.
Great, thank you, Nikki. Good afternoon, everybody. Just some highlights. MD Voters, which is our statewide voter registration database, which over the last 15 years has expanded into candidacy, and also the agency election management system, which will build the ballots from candidacy and voter registration. So we are in the midst of conducting refresher training on what we call district and precincts. And this is a module within MD Voters. And this allows the local board to move all of their precinct lines and whatnot. So this training is going to go a long way for the local board to start their cleanup, their street file cleanup in preparation for the upcoming redistricting and reapportionment process. Also, the Maryland Democratic Party is making changes on how the Central Committee candidates are going to be filing for office. There is now, under their bylaws, a new gender designation, which is non-binary. So all the developments that support this change has been made and put into production, and this affects the candidate certificate of candidacy and the ballot contest heading. So all of that has been implemented. To report the non-citizen registration and voting between June 19th, 2021 through July 16th, 2021, 6 voter records were canceled due to non-citizens. 2 of these records do have voting history, 1 from 2012 and 1 from 2020. And these records are going to be forwarded to the Office of the State Prosecutor. And then Andrea, Jared, and I will be meeting with the Office of the State Prosecutor. I believe we're still firming it up. It's going to be the first week of August to discuss how to best present their findings to you all, the state board members.
Great.
So with that, if there aren't any questions, I will turn it over to Jared.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jared.
Mary. Thank you. So a couple of the highlights right now, the candidate filings are moving along smoothly by appointment only. Right now, we've had 78 candidates file at SBE. On the campaign finance, the biggest is right now news is in Montgomery County for public financing. We've had now 2 candidates submit for qualification and certification. One has already qualified, and the disbursement of over $100,000 has been made to the candidate. And the second request is currently under review. Howard County has, and overall, there are 15 candidates in Montgomery County that have filed a notice of intent to participate in the program. We expect that number to increase as it gets closer and closer to the filing deadline. In Howard County, the other county that has a public financing program, 2 candidates have filed their notice of intent to participate, and none have submitted anything to qualify. On enforcement, we had 5 committees, as listed here, that had to pay civil penalties, basically ranging from $600 to $100 for failure to include authority lines, failure to record expenditures on campaign finance reports, and failure to record expenditures and contributions, and also disbursements by an unauthorized method of cash. And just another little thing is that the audit and enforcement unit is sending out notices to political committees that have vacancies in the position of the responsible officer. Basically, a responsible officer is either the chair or treasurer, and the committee must, by law, promptly fill that vacancy. And when there is a vacancy, the committee may not engage in any campaign or any financial activity until that vacancy is filled. So we want to make sure that these political committees have a full complement of officers for the 2022 election year. And if they fail to fill this vacancy, we will notify the state prosecutor's office about the failure. And
Jared, I have a question for you there.
Sure.
What is the definition of promptly?
It's not defined, but that's why we're sending out notices to them to kind of tell them, 30 days, that's prompt, outside of 30 days, that's not getting too prompt. And if you respond back to us, like why you're having difficulty finding individuals to fill these vacancies, at least we'll know. And we just wanted to make sure that they're aware of that the committee cannot engage in any financial activities until this vacancy is filled. So just making sure that they're aware of their legal obligations, and if transactions occur, the other responsible officer may be liable for penalties and possibly civil violations.
Now, it certainly could be that I just don't remember, but that seems to be like a large number, 59. Is this something that has happened in the past often for each year?
It's 59 out of 2,000 plus political committees. So, in that realm, it's not too bad. And some of these committees too, they should probably be closed. And so this is kind of like pushing them then to close their accounts with us rather than just file 0 reports. So it's a little bit of a cleanup as well.
Okay.
So, it should be good. And if they don't respond, getting the state prosecutor involved too will help push them along for compliance purposes.
Thank you.
No.
So who do we have next?
I believe Shafiq is on the line.
Good afternoon, and congratulations, Mr. Fun, on being nominated for VP. So just a couple updates related to voting system division. The first I wanted to touch on was the voting system upgrade. So several months ago, we at SBE started the process of thoroughly testing a new software suite, EVS 6110. After that testing, we have come to the conclusion that we don't plan on moving forward to present that software suite for certification. Identified a number of inefficiencies that would negatively impact our election calendar and back-end processes or workflows. And for those reasons, we're not going to be presenting it for certification at this time. Also wanted to bring up ballot marking device calibration checks. So this is in response to some reported incidents throughout the 2020 election cycle where there may have been some calibration issues reported during in-person voting as a means to thoroughly assess the units in question. SBE, in conjunction with the local boards, will be working through a thorough review of a subset of units. We'll be going through a myriad of testing to ensure that calibration is intact, and we will have documentation completed. The plan is to start this testing as early as this coming Monday, July 26th, with the understanding that, with vacations, conferences and the likes coming forward, that we want to wrap up these checks by the middle portion of September.
Just a couple questions on the voting system. So how long is the lease that we're extending on our current voting system? I think we have one extension we can use, right?
Yeah, no, we do have a lease extension. I'll defer to Nikki as contract manager for that.
Okay, thanks. So we are in a period through March 2023. And so they're 2-year periods. And then we have one final period we can exercise, and that would take us from April 2023 through March 2025, which really, it means it takes us through the 2024 elections if we decide to exercise that option.
Okay. And I'm reading here, and I know through some conversations that we're working to ensure, as it says on the record here, future software suites meet or exceed the standards or needs. Really, this is a needs issue with Maryland. So, are you hopeful to be able to look at this again, revisit this before meeting or by that 2023 timeframe?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we've had engagement with the vendor about a lot of different enhancements, and those communications have been very positive thus far.
Right. Thank you so much for your work on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I do have a few questions about the report on the voting system upgrade. And Shafiq, I appreciate your report and the work that you're doing. And this may be as much for my edification as a new member of the board, but I read this and I would like to know, can we have examples of what the inefficiencies are that have been identified? What does that mean exactly?
Sure. I mean, I can give you one example. So with our current electionware suite, we go through a process of defining, obviously, the election database, configuring or establishing content for the election. And then we go through a process that's kind of known as finalization, where we kind of package everything. And then we go through another phase of actually that testing. Within this suite, we saw an increased amount of time throughout that process that would negatively impact our calendar. So the amount of time it would take for us to get through these different phases of defining the election and moving into, proofing and things of that nature. There's things like that that we're back in that would be a negative impact to our processes and other related election-related activities.
So let me just provide a little bit of context for that. So our window of time to do what Shafiq just explained, which is we know the candidates, right? Their candidates are set, they're filed for office. We take that data and then there's a person in our office who builds the ballots for every single county. And doing precinct level ballots means that we have 1,800 or 1,600 ballots that have to be created, or ballot styles that have to be created. And then for every ballot style, there are multiple versions of that ballot. So one that if you vote in person, you're getting. One, you use the ballot marking device, you're getting. A sample ballot. There's like 6 to 8, I think, different versions of every ballot style. So it takes a long time to build all of that. And one of the things we learned is this finalization process for us was something that was just a matter of seconds. And this time it was extending into minutes, which doesn't seem like a lot here and there. But if you have to finalize 1,600 ballots, now that's really impacting our very short window of time to do this. So we do our piece, we push it out to the locals for them to proof, because the more eyes on this, the better. And it's such a tight time frame from when the candidates file for office and all of our processes to be ready for the 45-day federal requirement for our military and overseas voters. There just is very little room there. And anything that can add on a day or two to the process is critical. And so that's this ballot creation, finalization, and proofing process really raised concerns about our ability to meet all of our requirements in this already tight time frame. I'm not sure if that helps a little bit with context.
It does. I have a couple more questions. So in light of this and the fact that it was presented for certification, not planning to certify at this time, is there any implication for the 2022 election?
You said implication as far as it like an impact?
Any implications? I mean, what's happening now is that, are there any concerns about going into 2022? No. Okay.
Yeah, we will just continue with the certified electionware suite that is currently in state.
Okay. So my next question, and it really goes to what's specifically stated in the report, and really jumping off from what Nikki said, there's a statement here that ES&S and SBE will proactively collaborate to ensure future software suites meet or exceed the standards and needs of Maryland. What is contemplated by proactively collaborating?
So one of the things is to have a series of meetings prior to future software releases to ensure that some of the standards that need to be met in Maryland are implemented prior to that software suite being introduced for federal certification. That's what we mean by the proactive, because obviously if it's already gone to the EAC, for example, for certification, and then it doesn't meet our standards, then there's an issue there that we have to work through. It's a long process. So that's what we mean by proactive. We want to engage. We've been sharing, our findings with ES&S. Like I said, they've been very responsive, coming back and forth with us. And so we're at that point now trying to hash out, they're trying to work through that process. So when they present that next version of certification, it actually does meet or exceed Maryland standards.
And what is the timing on submitting it for its next consideration for certification? What's the timing on that?
That I wouldn't be able to answer because I can't really speak on ES&S and their schedule or time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much again for your work on that. I know that it's extensive in your testing and in your consideration of all that. Thank you for your work. Now we'll move on. I guess, who do you have for, who's giving the PMO report?
Mr. Chair, this is Keith Ross for the Project Management Office, and I'd like to present to the board what is in writing for inventory management, the FY22 poll book project, and other for your consideration and any questions that you may have.
We certainly have your written report. Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Ross about the report as presented?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ross, you have here the poll book project for 2022, and you've put out a request for a proposal. And I guess I want to know, where are we in that process? And as we're looking at the response to that, the costs that we would receive from the vendors, how would they stack up with other systems that are using like type poll books?
So to your first part of your question, we're currently in the evaluation of the financials of the poll book, and one of the later efforts in the whole evaluation process. So we're currently going through that exercise, and working through some issues and questions that are being worked out currently. To your second part, that's difficult to answer in one, not knowing who the vendor is, so we don't have those costs, of a selected vendor. We have the costs that we have seen, but there had been no comparison to any other jurisdiction or any other efforts at this time.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Fun, I want to point out that Mr. Ross is trying to be extremely careful in how he is presenting and what he's saying, because it is, as a procurement, it is. I
understand.
Yeah, I mean, we could. There could be potential if we had other questions as a board, we could do that in closed session, but those would be not available for public consumption because it's in the procurement process, so that's by state law. So thanks to both parties. Any other questions? Thank you. So who's presenting the information systems portion?
So this is Brett Bill, SPE. I will go ahead and present that. Get my screen on here. So for those board members who may not have realized in the 2020 election, just due to the circumstances, there was a large number of mail-in ballot applications that the local boards needed to process, far larger than the normal election. So in order to try to assist the local boards, we set up a data processing center in partnership with the Motor Vehicle Administration in Glen Burnie, so that we could process these hundreds of thousands of applications. It was very successful, and definitely was a key piece to have a successful election, one of many key pieces? Well, with the new legislation, House Bill 1048, it looks like we can most likely expect a similarly large number of mail-in ballot applications. So we've been in contact with the MVA, and they have indicated their willingness to provide the facilities again for auxiliary data processing center. It is a fairly significant IT effort on both sides, so we wanted to get things started. And the first step was finding out if the training rooms that we used before were available, and it does look like we will be able to request those. So that was really good news. Also, just a couple little things. IT department, again, due to new legislation and the requirement to provide a texting, the ability to text information to voters, the IT division has been looking at various technologies for performing that. We're still looking at it, but it does look like there are many promising applications out there, so we don't foresee an issue at this time. So we're looking at that. And then also with the recent kind of move moving away from 100% teleworking, we're looking at hybrid meeting solutions so that for those folks that are in the office, it will be easier to have meetings like this one, for instance, where some people can be in the office, other people can be at home, remotely connecting, and everyone's able to talk and participate interactively in an effective manner. So we've looked at a few options there, tested a couple of them out. We don't have one selected just yet, but it's promising.
Can I ask you a question on that, Fred?
Yes.
That is something that I potentially see coming for the board, is something that is more of a hybrid where people that are uncomfortable are able to participate in the board via being off-site. When do you think, what's your timetable, do you think, on choosing a solution? And would it be the solution that you're going to choose, would it work for a broader meeting like we have here?
Yeah, the vendor specifically that we're looking at has several different solutions. One is very large for large auditoriums. Another one is mid-sized. Even that one may be overkill for the size of the SBE lobby, but we're going to look at that solution for the SBE lobby. And then there's also mobile solutions where you just carry a device around, and if you have a small conference room, maybe a private office, if you want to include people that are remote but only a few people in private office, there's a solution for that as well. So yes, I do feel that it would work well for this meeting specifically. Time frame, it's going to depend on procurement a little bit, but I would imagine in the next few months.
Thank you.
And then I believe Art was going to talk about the tabletop.
Sure. Were there any other questions for Fred before we move to Art? Seeing none, Art, we are ready for you.
I don't actually see him on the meeting. So I think the written report covers this. This is something that the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency coordinates for election officials every year. This is, I think, our third or fourth year participating, and I unfortunately wasn't able to, but the feedback I received was it was really good.
Great.
So they are learning every year. And this is just a way for us to practice responding to bad scenarios that could happen, so that, God forbid they happen, we have some practice and we know what to do. So I will, if you have questions, we might need to defer them, but happy to take them and get back to you on them.
Any questions on that? So seeing none, are there any other questions on the administrator's report that Mr. passed up? So we will say that the administrator's report is complete, and we move on to the illustrious Assistant Attorney General's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple new matters to describe, and a couple matters have fallen off our list this week, so I'll get right to it. Update in the Fisaro matter, Fisaro versus Dabit. This is a case where the plaintiff initially sought access to Maryland's registered voter list. There's a state law that limits access to registered voters of Maryland, among other things. Because of a case that was decided last year, which held that requirement, that Maryland state requirement, was preempted by the National Voter Registration Act. Mr. Fisaro was given access to that list, but he is now suing to challenge the restriction on the use of the list for electoral purposes only. So that case, we prevailed in the federal district court, is now on appeal in the Fourth Circuit. We have oral argument has now been scheduled for the week of September 21st. And probably expect a decision several months after that. No update this week in the NFB versus Lamone case, still in the process of finalizing settlement agreements, and that is proceeding. The stay is currently set to expire August 2nd, 2021 of discovery. No update in the Chong-Soo Yi matters, so I won't describe them. Number 4, this was a case that first appeared on this report last time we got together. It's captioned Bravo versus Pelosi. It is a wide-ranging challenge to every aspect of the 2020 elections, names every federal government elected government official as a defendant, as well as every governor and state secretary of state as defendants, as well as several private individuals like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and so on. We were voluntarily, I should say, Governor Hogan and Secretary Wobensmith were voluntarily dismissed from the case at the end of June due to the plaintiff's stated, at least he explained to me and to the court, that he simply didn't have the resources that he was expecting to have to be able to bring such a massive lawsuit. And so he was trying to narrow and focus the claims. So anyway, no Maryland official is a part of this case anymore, so it's going to come off our list in future reports. And finally, it's a new matter that doesn't involve directly the Board of Elections, but it does relate to conduct, election-related conduct, particularly campaign finance conduct that could impact how state campaigns are run. This is a case called WinRed Inc. versus Ellison. WinRed is a federal PAC set up to support and help raise money for Republican candidates across the country. Several weeks ago, a group of attorneys general, including Attorney General Frosch, sent jointly letters to WinRed and Act Blue, which is the Democratic Party PAC, seeking information and documents about the practice of these organizations regarding their use of pre-checked recurring contribution boxes. These are boxes that might appear on a campaign donation solicitation that say, I want to make this a recurring payment, so this $100 I'm paying right now, I'm authorizing you to continue to charge me for the next whatever, for the first of every month or first of every week or what have you. The question posed by these is just seeking information on the use of those boxes and to the extent they are pre-checked so that somebody had to uncheck them if they didn't want to do that and so on. WinRed has brought a lawsuit against those attorneys general alleging that the state consumer protection statutes pursuant to which the attorneys general are seeking that information, investigating the practice, are preempted by federal law. And so that really is governed by federal campaign finance restrictions, which don't speak to the issue. So that case is pending in Minnesota. It was just filed a few weeks ago. There is a deadline for a response to the complaint. It's currently July 29th. So that's the update on that case. And other than that, I have nothing to add. I should note that one case that I removed from the list was a case that was called Johnson versus PG County Board of Elections. It's been dormant for at least 3 years. It was a lawsuit brought by several plaintiffs claiming that the practices of the Board of Elections and the Department of Corrections were not sufficient to give incarcerated persons who were still eligible to vote with sufficient information to allow them to exercise that right. There was a case was removed to federal court because it raised federal constitutional issues. The constitutional claims were dismissed by the federal court, and so then it was remanded back to circuit court in PG County, where it has sat dormant for several years. I've decided to remove it from the list, both because nothing has happened in the case in several years, and also because legislation was passed this year that set up a system for providing information where the Board of Elections would work with Department of Corrections and institutions across the state to provide information to inmates who are being released or inmates who are detained but haven't been convicted and thus still have the right to vote. So my hope is that case will just continue to lie dormant, and then at some point we will get it off the docket. But I decided this is my hopefully last explanation I'll give about it, and we won't have to see it again, cluttering up the illustrious report that I provide every week. So, or every month. So unless anyone has any questions, I have nothing further to add.
Are there any questions for Mr. Trento?
I just have one question, and it's just out of curiosity. Andrea, the Bravo v. Pelosi case, are the plaintiffs pro se, or do they have a lawyer?
They do have a lawyer. I can't remember his name, but his email address is fireduptexaslawyer@AOL.com or Verizon.com, something like that. So he is counsel. It's a purported class action. He's representing, purporting to sue on behalf of the 320 million Americans whose rights to free and fair elections were violated in 2020.
Okay. Thank you. Again, just a point of curiosity.
Any other questions for Mr. Trento? Seeing none, thank you very much, Andrea, for your Attorney General's report. We'll move on to now, again, we've moved the order in our agenda, so we will be on number 8. We will come back to number 7, and that's the approval of mail-in ballot application number 2 for 2022. I believe both the old and the new application have been distributed to everyone, along with a report that I believe we're going to go over now. Who's going to be handling that? Is that going to be you, Nikki, or you're muted?
Sorry, thank you. I'm gonna manage this on behalf of Jen. So you have, I guess I would call them the current version, which is the version of the form that you approved at last month's meeting, and a proposed version of the form that is based on the study and testing performed by the University of Baltimore and Center for Civic Design. And so we have on the phone or on the meeting, Catherine Summers and Tasman Swanson, who Jen introduced earlier. So like to start with them. They have a presentation to share that talks about their testing and the proposed changes to the application. So David, if you could turn it over to, I think Catherine's going to show her slides, and then they'll present it, and then we can come back for discussion.
There we go.
Okay, I think I'm, give me just one minute to try to, I couldn't really clean up my screen ahead of time because, no.
And so just a question for you to start. Would you prefer us to stop you with questions as we go along, or would you prefer to complete your presentation and then be available for questions?
I'm fine either way. Truly, whatever you can interrupt me. I'm a university professor. I get interrupted all the time. It doesn't bother me. Right?
Well, that's how we'll do it then, since you're so used for it. If any board member has a question, you can act like a college student.
All right, so I am, as I explained, I'm Catherine Summers, professor at the University of Baltimore. Tasman and Sean are also, well, Tasman's here. My research focus is making forms and online interactions accessible and easier to use. Tasman also has a lot of experience in this. It's been our pleasure really to work on this project and to work with you. As you know, the goal for this project was set by the legislature. The idea is to make mail-in voting easier for voters. This has sort of a secondary goal that follows naturally. If we can make it easier for voters to fill out this particular form more accurately, it's also going to have benefit us in that it reduces processing time and effort for election administrators. Out of all the research that I've done over the years, I identified 4 principles that played the biggest role in the improvements that we made. These all relate to reducing cognitive load. If you can make something easier to do, so you're not diverting cognitive resources, you increase the chance that people will understand and be able to follow instructions accurately. So for example, when we make it look easy to read, we all relax, and it therefore becomes easier to read. We want to, same with simple familiar words, simple sentences, making it easy to follow along the path of the document so you never have to pause and figure out where to go next. Making it easy to, when you link up very tightly the instructions and then you're following the instructions immediately. All of those things reduce cognitive load. For this project, we had 2 major user research efforts. First, we did a focus group with election officials from across Maryland. And then second, we did rapid iterative testing and evaluation with actual voters, filling out actual, mail-in ballot forms. And this method relies on making lots of small iterative changes. So every time someone makes a mistake or you see a moment of confusion, you say, what might fix that? You make that change and then immediately test again to see if your improvement actually solved the problem, right? We did that testing in the University of Baltimore User Research Lab. We had 6 men, 9 women, 14 English speaking, 3 Spanish speaking. We'll have a few more Spanish speaking tests at the end of this month. We started by asking what are the problems that showed up during the 2020 general election. And so from the focus group with election officials, they had plenty to say about, and it's not that actually I think Maryland is to be congratulated. It was a very successful effort to handle both elections with mail-in voting. But obviously, given the sheer scale of how many mail-in voting ballots there were, things showed up. So the first problem was that voters didn't always provide the address where they were actually registered. They would provide instead a temporary address where they were perhaps living. Second, which is that voters submitted multiple requests for mail-in ballots. They do it on paper and online, or even multiple times online, because they weren't sure if it had gone through, they didn't see their ballot right away. And unfortunately, that means every request has to be processed because you don't know if they're trying to change their request or just repeating it. And so that led to significant burdens for election offices. The next big problem was that there are 3 main ways to receive the ballot, either through the mail, or you are emailed a link that you can use to print your ballot, or through fax. Voters were often choosing multiple options, which then required follow-up from election officials to figure out how they actually wanted to receive their ballot. And then last, and this won't surprise you, voters who chose to receive their ballot by email then expected to return it by email. They were often not prepared and not excited about printing. So let's look at how we addressed those changes. We'll go through the form little by, or sort of in sections. So in the first 3 sections, this was where we were getting current temporary addresses rather than the address where they were registered. So we rewrote and tested the language about address to focus on the address where the voter is registered. And we added information about why we need that. That this address must match your voter registration so that we can send you the right ballot. If you can help people understand something, they make fewer mistakes. And then we refocused section 1 on voter information, relocated the date of birth to that section. We added some text about party affiliation, again, trying to explain that you have to be registered in order to vote in the primary. And then in the address field, we pre-filled the state field with MD so that if someone is filling in a non-Maryland address, which happens not infrequently, say with college students, they would get to that and say, oh, you know, it would be a moment of shock or of surprise, not shock, when they might say, huh, why is this here? And then they might go back to the instructions. So it's a chance for them to catch someone who might be still misunderstanding it. So those are the changes to the first 3 sections. The next 2 sections are where were the most challenging and where we went through the most versions. So this is where so often local election officials had to spend time contacting voters, trying to figure out what their preferences actually were. So one of the things we did here, of course, was to add the language about the permanent mail-in voting list. And then we also used some bolding on the options to help signal the differences between those options. And all of this language was tested and found to be adequately clear. Then for the options as to how you're going to send it, we did a number of things. We added word and visual cues to help voters separate the options. So you see this line here, the indentations, the grouping. We tried to make it more clear visually that there were 3 different things here. We rewrote and then tested the language about printing your ballot. It doesn't say email me my ballot or internet delivery or anything that might trigger that mental model of, oh, you're going to send it to me through email and I'm going to send it back. We changed all that language to be email a link to print my ballot, and explained in the site, if you print your own ballot or get your ballot by fax, election workers will, it's about the fact that they'll have to recopy it onto an official ballot. And then we also added information about that they'll need their own stamp and envelope. Finally, in the first option, we moved the address fields to be literally next to the option they apply to, because we were seeing many, many voters fill this out, sometimes often with the same address. So just to save the confusion and the effort, by moving it over so that it followed in a line from the option or a different address, that seemed to make the connection in voters' minds, so they stopped filling that out unnecessarily. Oops. So
Can I ask you a question? I hate to be that.
Absolutely.
We have, I know I have as a board member, wanted to balance not making anyone with a disability, like somebody who's visually impaired, for instance, feel like that they don't have an option to have an internet delivered ballot or email delivered ballot, versus our desire not to duplicate as many, which causes a burden on the LBEs. So before, we've used the word like preferred around the sending of the ballot. And I know here you have the stuff on the left. Can you walk through, did you think, was that either of those ideas, any part of your thinking, and did you test for any of that? And what are your thoughts around that?
Yes, we did have language on there about, what's preferred and trying to, because of the labor issues and other issues. And we got the guidance from a few folks and from Nikki and Linda that Maryland needs to not label one as preferred, which made perfect sense. So we took that language off. What we tried to do was to nudge people towards mail with the visual design so that those who need it feel no, as you say, no stigma or deterrence or discouragement on the way to getting a link to print their ballot. But it's still not internet delivered. The ballot is not delivered over the internet, right? What you get is an email with a link where you can then, mark your ballot or print it and then mark it. But it's really, the ballot is something you're then going to print. So by really removing language that talked about emailing you the ballot or internet delivery, we're hoping that people will come to it with a clearer, with a clear mental model is what we often call it. They understand what's happening and what's going on, and so they can make their decision with that more accurate understanding. So I think there's going to be no stigma here for people who need accessibility options. We certainly saw that with the people we were testing, they understood, and some still chose to get an email with a link so they could print their own, and many chose to get it through the mail. But they understood what they were choosing, and that was encouraging.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for your answer.
So because this section saw so many changes, we just wanted to give you a moment to compare this was the earlier version and then look at our revision. So this one had two main problems. They filled out the same address unnecessarily, and then they selected both options for mail and email. So we clarified and created more separation between those two options, as well as clarifying the language here so that it was more clear what was being offered, and then moved the address over. So it went through a lot of revisions to get to what looks, I hope, fairly simple. Then the last part of the form, we had a new section that we dedicated to voter contact information to help to make it easier for election officials if they do need to contact voters, with an explanation as to why we were collecting that information. And then in the signature area, we used just a smidgen of color to call out the voter signature. We used the same style signature box as the envelope does, and this is optimized for scanner technology, should that ever become relevant. And then we moved the assistant signature below and optimized it and signaled it, sort of emphasized it a little less strongly visually so that we didn't get people signing in both places. So the final thing that we did was with the contact sheet, we put it on a white background and made it a bilingual version. And you can see it's not dramatically better, but it's cleaner and simpler. And because it's bilingual, that will benefit Spanish-speaking voters throughout the state. So next steps, the project is continuing. We're going to do a little more testing with Spanish-speaking voters. And then we're planning to test the language about mail-in voting that is on the online request tool. We're going to revise and test email and text communications about mail-in voting, the ones that surround mail-in voting, to make sure that they're clear and working, and then test the information about mail-in voting on the State Board of Elections website. So,
excuse me. Yes, I have a question. On slide 13, the contact sheet on the back, you have there under the line, it says fill out and sign your mail-in ballot request form, then deliver it or mail it to your local election office. There is a third option according to the statute, and that is they also can drop it in a ballot drop box. Why is that not listed there?
We can certainly add that. Are the ballot drop boxes, I guess that would be relevant during an open voting season. It wouldn't, it might be a little confusing to have that on there during times when there are no ballot drop boxes. But we can certainly explore that.
Well, maybe that's something we need to look at, because I know section 33.11.02.01 D(2) B I states that the request was submitted via a ballot drop box. How the local board may access it by one put in a ballot drop box.
All right, well, thank you for calling that to our attention.
You know, maybe something where it says if available, or.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely look at that and try to make it, like you say, simple but not confusing.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm, for that question and for bringing that up. Are there any other questions from any board members?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of observations, if I may.
You may.
I want to raise something that we did bring up at the last meeting, and it also is on the second page, the contact sheet. There are local boards of election that are only identified by post office box. And if a voter is being instructed to deliver to a local election office, they need to have a street address.
Yeah.
So that needs to be corrected. We talked about that last meeting.
This is Donna. Hi. That was being corrected. There was a formatting. Somebody was working on that. Those will be corrected by the time it goes to print.
Okay.
So then it would have both, they would have both on it, Donna? It would have the PO box and the street address?
That is
Yes.
correct.
And in fact, I think Tasman has worked on those changes, and they may be ready. Tasman, I don't know if you're allowed to speak.
Yeah, I'm looking at the version that's in the meeting materials that are online, and it might be a different version than what you have in front of you right now. The version online, every county has a street address. Many of them have both a street address and a PO box, but I believe we've made those changes.
So those changes came to us after the handout that you got. But if you look at the one on the slide, that's correct.
Yes, I see what you're referring to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Calling to our attention. That's really important, as you say.
Yeah. Okay. So my other thing is well, first of all, let me say, and I should have said this a moment ago. I do think that the way that this has been visually represented and the reformatting of this and how certain pieces of information have been put into the same section, I applaud you on this. I mean, it is much easier to read. I do think it makes much more intuitive sense, and it should be more user-friendly in this format. So I just wanted to give you that observation. I appreciate the work that all of you have done. I don't want to wordsmith this, but I personally think that the margin comment in the where should we send your ballot probably still needs some clarification. Again, I don't know that this meeting is the time to go through this, but if I were looking at the third paragraph of the margin comments of where should we send your ballot, I would, instead of saying, if you print your ballot from an email, I would say, if you choose email,
Okay. And I think you may be looking, I'm not sure, the one that I have on the slide, and I put it up, it says, if you choose option B, we will email a link to print your ballot. about 3 weeks before the election. You will need to provide your own envelope and stamp, or you can deliver it to your election office. So we may have, it sounds like
We
you
don't have the
and
last
I were-
version.
Yeah, we don't have that, yeah.
We're so sorry. We're so sorry, but it's
Okay.
encouraging that we were thinking along the same lines. So that's great.
No, that is good. That is good that you had already assessed or figured out that we would have some issues. I will say though, and this isn't directed to you, but it is frustrating as a board member who got prepared for this meeting and spent time reviewing the documents that were provided to us. And I wasted my time. So,
I apologize.
no, I'm not, like I said, I'm not directing it to you. I'm just expressing some frustration that
Yes.
we've wasted time and now we're wasting time because we weren't working off of the same sets of documents. So,
I completely agree, and it is not Nikki or Linda's fault. This is actually on us because we've been making. It has been an iterative process, and so we found a couple of last-minute things that we fixed, and so it is really on us, and we are sorry. But I am impressed and grateful that you for the care with which you went through it. It is reassuring that we'll make sure it doesn't happen again.
okay. Well, thank you. Let me just raise my final point because I would actually have to go back and look at the entire document again to see if all of my other concerns are addressed. But I will say on section number 2, residential address,
Yes.
where we have used the word right ballot. I think that word could be off-putting to to someone who wants to vote. I would suggest that the language be changed so that we can send you the correct ballot for your election district.
Okay.
I think people need to understand, I think our voters need to understand that it has to be the correct ballot, not a right or a wrong ballot, but the correct ballot. And it has to be a correct ballot based upon where they would otherwise be going to get their ballot, the numerous precincts and election districts, et cetera, which is why we have 1,000 different versions of potential ballots. But I think that's a clarification that it's important for someone to understand that it's consistent with your election district or precinct, whatever the correct word would be. I'll defer to Nikki on that. But I would like to see that clarification because I like how you've made it clear that we have to send them the ballot for their registration address, but there's a reason behind it that we could very simply say with a few more words.
So we typically, if there's a 1-syllable word or a more familiar word rather than a 2-syllable word, we tend to go towards the 1-syllable. But I think in this case, changing right to correct will work perfectly well. And so we will implement that, and we'll double check, as we always do, the next time we have someone come in and fill it out. But I think that should be a very easy change and very workable. So
thank you.
Thank you for your care and attention. That was pretty impressive.
Thank you, Sky. Any other members with a question for this topic?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
also a observation.
Yes.
I guess I'm looking at the most recent the version like this. So that's slide 9. The language instructions on the left column. I echo Sky's comments. I think this is thoughtfully designed and user friendly. I'm thinking through it as part of like maybe future next revision or as wordsmithing, including the option B, excuse me, that if make it clear that if you print your own ballot or get your ballot by fax, that's relates to option B or C. So there's a way to organize it. It's like a note that if you select B or C, you're going to get it by fax or by email in 3 weeks. I'm assuming fax and email delivery are similarly timed. And that either way, you'd have to provide your own envelope and stamp to send it back.
Okay, so your point is that language applies to option C as well as to option B?
I believe so. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on someone else on the call.
I agree, it certainly would. I think what we'll do before is check with the boards, the local boards, and find out how many ballots they get through fax. We don't want to take it off because it's part of the statutory. It's part of the code. But if people aren't using that, then we don't want to muddy up the instructions with information that doesn't actually apply to hardly anyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we'll double check that. So we'll make a note and then we'll go check and see what the prevalence is, and then respond accordingly. So thank you.
Does anyone?
Right. My thinking is that, just organizing it and even pushing it down to match 5B on like the same level would be more user friendly and intuitive. And then I missed last meeting. I saw the minutes and discussions about the preferred language, but I mean, to the extent we want to nudge or push people to choose option A, showing that there's all these other steps involved in 5B and 5C would, I think, also help to nudge people to use the simple 5A option.
That in fact was our intention. I don't know if if we can push it down because of the space. You can see how much space there is and how much space there is. But you're dead right that, in a perfect world, we'd have those lined up. So yes, absolutely.
I ask a question, and maybe somebody on the staff knows, how many fax ballots did we? I mean, is there any more that we're sending by fax?
Yeah, that. We'll have to go check that. I don't. Go ahead.
It's very, very few and far between.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Justin, for that very good observation. Did you have, or anyone else, do you have any other questions at this point?
Mr. Chairman, I hope you don't mind, but and I don't mean to speak out of turn here, but there's one thing I just wanted to raise with the group, just to make sure it gets considered before we go too far down a particular direction. But the I guess slide 8, the portion of the application that deals with political party affiliation, there's a new statement, which I think is very helpful in the margin, that says to vote in the primary election, you must choose a political party. And this comes up, as you all know, every election. People realize they're not affiliated and they complain that they can't vote in the primary. And so that's designed to, remind people that they need to affiliate. The problem is there are 5 parties, I think, listed there. And to vote in the primary election, you have to be a Democrat or a Republican, because none of the other parties are nominate candidates by primary. And so, unfortunately, it requires a bit of an explanation. And so I just want to, but as it's written now, I think somebody who's resisted affiliating with a party and frustrated that they can't vote in the primary, they see that and they go, oh, great, I can register as Libertarian or Green or something, and I'll be able to vote in the primary. And then they find out, well, shoot, I can't vote in the primary after doing this. So I just want to raise that issue. And I don't know that there's an easy solution to it without just cluttering up the margin and explaining how it is that you can affiliate and vote in the primary. But it seems to be a little bit misleading as it's written now.
That's a very good question.
It's a really good question. I don't think I think what we need to do is then go explore that. Let's see what people understand from this and try some, without getting, like you say, too lengthy. Are there some small language tweaks, something that will fit in our space that we could make that more clear? So that's really helpful. I didn't actually know that. There are only two primaries.
So to vote, to clear that up, to vote in the Democratic primary, you must be a registered Democrat. We don't have open primaries in Maryland. To vote as a Republican, you must be a Republican affiliated voter. If you're unaffiliated or libertarian or green, you can vote in neither the Democrat nor the Republican primary.
Right, which is way more text than we can do, but we might be able to say, to vote in the Democratic or Republican primary, you must be registered as a Democrat or a Republican. So that's probably what I'd try first.
Yeah.
And see how, does that communicate what they need?
Yeah, something along those lines I think would be appropriate. Andrea, thank you for pointing that.
As a suggestion,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, please.
I think if you just added in the statement, to vote in the primary election, you must choose a political party that is having a primary.
That might also work. I'm going to write, give me a second. I want to write both.
So if I may, Catherine, you and I can talk tomorrow because there are Board of Education contests that anybody can vote for.
That's right.
You don't have to be affiliated with with the D or the R's to do that. So it's even more complicated than what we've been saying.
Yes.
We'll see if it's fixable. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I'd like to say that I am duly impressed by the work you all have done. I'm very, very thankful that you all are working on this. And I think that what we have here is, heads above where we have ever been in the past. So I thank you for that. And so my only question, again, being having been as part of, being a board president at the LBE level and served on the board 4 years before that, is that I want to make sure that we are balancing being sensitive to those, surely with a disability, but we are doing everything we can to those that do not have a disability to let them know that we really want a mail ballot. And so my question is very simple: is do you feel like, that we have done everything we can to do that without jeopardizing somebody feeling they couldn't vote who had a disability?
I can say confidently we've done everything we've been able to think of so far.
Okay.
We will continue to, we're going to work on this through the next couple of months, not this form specifically, but just the project overall. And I promise, if we think of anything else, we'll bring it back to you. But we think we've made some progress with it. We do.
It's been great. It's great. I want to say that for the record. I'm very, very impressed by the work you all have done and the care that you have put into it. And I think that the form is, we obviously we're making some very minor tweaks, but I think where we are now is something that is a much better. It's obviously what you do.
Well, thank you. Tasman and I have really enjoyed working on the project. So.
That's great. So are there any other questions that anybody on the board has? So my question now to Nikki is that, do you need, you would like to adopt a new ballot request form, right? Mail-in ballot request form.
Yes, we would like to, have you all approve the much improved. So thank you, Catherine, Tasman, and Sean. Adopt this. Of course, if it comes back with other language, we can bring it back to tweak it. But our preference would be to at least get this one up on the internet and be available for use now. And again, we can come back with any other changes in the future.
So, and so that I understand that, I want to just speak that back, that the potential changes we've already talked about are how we're talking about political party affiliation and how we're talking about the ballot as a residential address. and if there's anything else around the faxing of the ballot. Would those be the three areas of, and anything else they may have that they may come up with to help us move towards ballot A? Would that, did I summarize that well, Nikki, the things that are being worked on?
This is Catherine. That sounded like a good summary to me. I do think it's worth approving this one just because it's better than the previous, rather than waiting till every little tweak is in place. I think that it would be good. I hope that you'll approve this one, and then, you know, we'll do what we can with the additional issues.
Okay. My other question is, Nikki, this is to you, Nikki, is that I know we're going to end up mailing ballot applications. That's a long way away. So where is the sunset on our time to make changes for the one that would get printed and mailed?
Oh, at least through the end of 2021.
Okay, great. So what the chair would entertain is a motion to accept the mail-in ballot request form as presented, knowing that there may be some additional changes in the coming meetings and that we would not have to have our final for printing until the end of 2021. Anybody feel so compelled to make that motion? Is there any discussion around, does anybody on the board have a problem with this form being better than the one that is before to get it up online? Is there some thinking there, some discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Unquestionably, this is a better form than the one we looked at last meeting. And it's certainly just generally better. I suppose my hesitancy is how many times are we going to keep needing to do this? And I'm wondering if perhaps, given that it's July going into August, if we could just get all of this worked out in terms of these language tweaks and be able to do a pretty much a final that would be the go-to form, and we're not having to revisit this repeatedly. That's where my hesitation is, to just go ahead and approve this at this time, knowing that we're going to have to discuss it again, perhaps as early as August, probably in September, maybe no later than that. So I'm not saying I'm not prepared to vote on it today and to vote favorably for it. I'm just questioning the timing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. My concern with that would be that those that are requesting absentee ballots, and that we will not be having, probably, we have to need to vote on that. We probably, because of the biennial convention, will not be having an August meeting. So we will not meet until September. So in that 45 to 60 day time period, the number of ballots that may come in, if this would improve the data that we get, would be my pushback to that, is that, this is not a permanent vote. This would be better than we have now until we can revisit that language at the September meeting. But any other board members have a different thought or have a different idea?
Well, all I would say is, given that we won't actually take this up in August, but we would anticipate taking it up in September, could we have it right by September, such that this could be a vote for an interim form to go onto the website, be in place for the next 60 days or thereabouts, and then the expectation 60 days from now, September meeting, that we would have this ready to go. It's been vetted, corrected, and we're pleased with it. I just want to make that, I would just like to see us get on that plan.
And just to end, I know Justin's looking to talk. Let me just say, Sky, if that were the motion, that would be what would carry, right? So if you made the motion that it would be a temporary form to be edited for its final version in September, that would be the motion that would be on the table. And I would agree with that. Mr. Williams, did you have a comment?
Oh, basically, I just echoed Sky's comments and her. I in line with her thinking. That's why I was hesitant to move forward because was concerned about the interim nature, but I also don't want to be standing in the way of progress, especially if it's this is an interim measure, and we know we'll come back in 2 months to hopefully vote in the final final version. So
Sure.
I'm good.
Do I have any other comments on?
I think that approach is sensible. It just sounds a little bit too much to me right now, like an agreement to agree, or an agreement in principle without some substantial parts filled in. So if we want to do it on an interim basis, I would be very comfortable with that, as long as we keep attention to it and take care of it.
Okay. Mr. Fund, did you have any thoughts on it?
I would go along with that. It's the idea that it's an interim fix, and it's for the website, recognizing that we will have a final one at least within the next couple of months.
So the chair would entertain a motion for the interim approval of this form to be used on the website until we can look at the final version as presented and hash that out in the September meeting.
Rather than an interim approval, I think it's approval of an interim form.
Okay. So would you like to make that motion?
I move that we approve the interim form at this time, recognizing that the final form will be looked at and finalized in the future.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that motion? I don't want to just jam this through. I want to make sure everybody's heard. And are you okay with that motion? Okay, seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion which has been seconded signify by saying aye.
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 All right, that is 100. That's 100% ayes. So the interim form is approved, and we look forward to revisiting and finalizing this in hopefully the September meeting. Thank you to everyone. Now I have to locate my agenda again. I think that is there. Thank you so much for coming and presenting as well, the board. And I know I extend our gratitude for not only the work you've done, but for being here as well to answer questions and in this work and the continued work that you do. So thank you very much for Catherine Summers and Tasman Swanson and Sean. I'm not gonna get that whole name right. Johnson. From the University of Baltimore and the Center of Civic Design. We're very appreciative to all of you and the work you've done and will continue to do. Thank you. So we will now, seeing that we are complete with number 8, which was number 7, we will now move to number 7, which is the approval of proposed changes to COMAR in 2 different areas of COMAR. Who is handling that?
I will. So you have, for this agenda item, 2 documents related to this. One is a memo from me dated July 2nd. And then one is I'm not sure how many pages it is, a couple pages of actual regulation changes. So I will just summarize them and then of course be happy to answer any questions. The first change is adding the definition of ballot box to regulations. It's now part of our election world. And it's referenced in various provisions and regulations. So wanted to define it at the top. And it just references the code definition. There are 2 regulations that sort of do the same kind of thing. And so I'm referring to 33050402C, and then a provision in the absentee ballot applications 33110201D. So under state law, which that Mr. Fun mentioned earlier, that ballot drop-off boxes or voters can use the ballot drop boxes to deposit both voter registration applications and absentee ballot applications. So these proposed changes just incorporate the use of ballot drop boxes for voters to use to return those. And so that's that authorizes that. Under the same absentee processing application section 33110205A, we now, as we've alluded to in today's meeting, we're not required to mail out to all eligible voters the form that you just approved interimly, but ultimately we'll be mailing out that form to all eligible voters. And when we did that last year, we obviously saw a huge surge in the number of voters that wanted to vote by absentee ballot. Obviously, it was pandemic related, but we do expect that the quantity of voters, the number of voters asking to vote by absentee ballot will be higher than our pre-2020 normal. And so these changes that we're proposing here today are actually changes that the board approved as emergency changes for the 2020 election. Those emergency changes have expired, and now we're presenting them for you for permanent adoption. And these simplify the processing of them by the local boards, allowing them to not have to date stamp every single application that comes in. So if it comes in before a certain period of time, they don't have to date stamp them, but they have to store them in such a way that if there's a question about when that application was received, they can establish that date. But then set a time frame when they must, when it gets really close to the deadline, that the local boards have to date stamp them, so that there's, it's most likely just going to be a challenge to whether something was timely right around the deadline, and in that case, they would be date stamped. So this is, again, just making permanent a change that we made last year. And similarly, similar change to the regulation that deals with returning of voted ballots. The board approved an emergency change last year that allowed the local boards, or required the local boards to date stamp the return envelope around that deadline time. But if it was received earlier than that they just had to store it in such a way that they could approve and establish the receipt date. So this would, again, just be moving that to a permanent change. And it also, so there's two changes in that. One is about the postmark, the date stamping. The second change in regulation 06F, as in Frank, this authorizes a voter to return a ballot at a ballot drop-off box that's now required by code. And so we just updated this section to make it mirror the requirements in the code. The final change, proposed change for absentee ballots is incorporating into the definition of timely, what timely is for a ballot returned at a ballot drop-off box. Again, they're authorized. We just need to update our regulations to reflect what constitutes being timely for a voted ballot. The last section is relating to early voting and election judges. This is similar to a change the board approved as an emergency reg with a few tweaks. So the current regulation says that the local boards must have someone on site for opening and closing of every day of early voting. That's the minimum requirement. Some counties have somebody on site all day, every day, but the minimum is that someone from the local board is on site to open and close. In the midst of the pandemic, we changed that so that they could provide remote support. And that worked well. The requirement of somebody on site for opening and closing, we put in place when we started early voting, thinking that extra support was needed. I think we've sort of established that we don't need that level of support. So allowing it to be an option for the local boards, that they don't have to have somebody on site every day for opening and closing, but saying that they have to have somebody on site to open the first day, to close the first day, and to close the last day. So we thought those three stages of early voting would be good to have somebody on site. Again, a local board can choose to have someone on site all the time, but they would have to be available remotely by phone, a video conference, FaceTime, whatever. They must provide support, but it does not have to be on site. So those are the changes presented to you today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
So we have multiple proposals here. What I'd like to do is see in general if we have questions on specific things, or there's any debate about particular amendments or particular titles and subtitles here, that we would pull them out of the group per se. So I'd like to open up the floor right now if anybody has comments or questions, and I will keep track about where those comments and questions come from. Yes, Mr. Fung.
Nikki, I guess I'm a little confused, and perhaps if I'm confused, I'm wondering about the general public. You know, we just talked about the mail-in ballot application form to receive a mail-in ballot. However, all of these regulations talk about absentee ballot, but the general public looks at mail-in ballot. And we no longer have absentee ballots. I thought it was changed to mail-in ballots. And maybe we should put in parentheses so that people reading it would not be confused or think that there's two separate things, that it's the same thing.
So great question. So the law that passed last year that said use mail-in ballot, it requires that we use mail-in ballot in all documents and forms that we give to the public. And the reason why we can't get rid of absentee altogether is because absentee is what's in the Constitution. It's what the legislature is still using in the code. And that's what we're still using in regulations. But what you'll be seeing, as Catherine presented today, and as you'll see in our forms, anything that goes to the public says mail-in ballot, mail-in voting. Our website, all of our forms, everything has mail-in, because that is a document going to the public. Generally, the public doesn't read our regs, and we're trying to make that be consistent with the code, which is consistent with the Constitution.
A question to Andre: if we're writing the regs, would we be able to put in parentheses behind absentee ballot, mail-in ballot?
There's no reason why you can't do that in the regs. That's really just a choice for you all to make. Obviously it would make them a little bit more wordy, but if you feel that is something that, should be clarified, there's certainly not a legal bar to providing that in the regs.
Well, I was just posed that as a thought.
It's a good question, Malcolm. I appreciate that question, and I'm sure others had that in their mind as well. Any other discussion or questions around the proposals here today?
Mr. Chair, I guess this probably maybe a broader discussion, and it can be tabled for a later date. I'm just thinking through it and more thinking out loud about the processing of the application. And one of the concerns raised was that when people check more than one option, then the local boards need to contact the voter to determine their intent. And I'm wondering if, as a policy matter, or regulatory matter, we could defer or say that if people check more than one, then we're going to say they're checking 5A, like the mail-in version, or we're going to assume if you check more than one box, we're just going to do the top option. But just more thinking out loud, and we can have that discussion.
So let me just to repeat back. You're saying that if we codified that, if somebody chose more than one option, that by default we would assume option A. Is that what you're saying?
That was much more precisely worded than my lengthier recitation. So thank you.
Yours was very clear. I just want to make sure my puny brain got it. So I don't think that's something contemplated in these.
Correct. Right? I'm more thinking out loud and what the universe or the number of calls that the local boards had to do. But if it was a significant enough burden, it's something I'm just thinking about. But we can table that for a later discussion.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. Are there any other comments or questions about these 6 changes that are proposed? Let me ask you a question, Malcolm. Are you concerned about the changes here that just say absentee ballots? Would you be looking to have that changed at this point? Is that something you'd like to have discussion on?
Well, I was just raising the issue because I was thinking if someone wants to go further into finding out about mail-in ballots, they wouldn't find anything in the regs referencing mail-in ballots per se. It's all references absentee ballots. And if you could reference absentee ballots and paren and say mail-in ballots so that anyone following through, naturally the average citizen perhaps would not go into the regs, but you may have some person that's, how can I say anal, but some person that may want to go into more detail. I think it would be further clarification. I would think it would be confused. Everything's referenced absentee ballot, and I recognize the Constitution and the statute, but if we have the opportunity and the regs to offer some clarification, perhaps we should take that into consideration.
So let me ask a question of, because I'm in a sea of attorneys and I'm not one. Do we have a definitions part of Title 33? And if so, could that be a future regulation change, COMAR change, where we would define mail-in ballot under the definition section?
Yeah, so we do have the beginning part of Title 33 of COMAR does have a definition section where, for example, I'm proposing to define ballot drop box today.
Okay.
So we could go in there and we could define mail-in ballot and mail-in voting there, which would save us from making the changes throughout the entire Title 33, which, we're happy to do that. It's a lot of work. I mean, even though it's a word find, you got to go in and you got to bracket. I mean, it's a substantial effort to make that change throughout, but it's not difficult to add it to the definition section.
So Malcolm, would you be okay if we kept these regulations the way they are, and that for our next meeting, we had a proposal to add that to the definition section?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I just think they should be joined somewhere.
Okay.
Definition is a good place to put it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and again, I don't know the process for this, but now that it's been raised, and I absolutely agree with Malcolm, I find it confusing because I'm old enough that I only think of these things as absentee ballots. We have a whole new generation and lexicon and technology, and now it's a mail-in ballot. And we do need to conform our nomenclature to what the ballot really is. That I pulled off from my shelf the election law.
Good for you.
And granted, it's a very dated version, but I think I'm referring to the correct section. And this probably goes back to a legislative correction or a legislative agenda item, not ours, but I think we need to make sure that somebody knows it needs to be dealt with. Because if you look at section 101 of the election law code, definitions and general provisions, within the definitions, there's no defined term for mail-in ballot. It simply isn't there. And that makes sense. This is an old version. This is a 21st century issue. The second definition is for absentee ballot. That's because it's alphabetical, not because it necessarily has any more prominence or importance. But anyway, so I just wanted to make sure that we as a board have in our notes, and if anybody is observing this, and this is a legislative change, for the election code, mail-in ballot needs to be appropriately defined in the Code of Maryland.
Yeah. Well, that's what Sky, what we're proposing that the staff bring back to us for the next meeting is adding in COMAR the definition. And in the process, with like these proposed changes, we vote on them, and then Nikki can explain better. I think they have to be published first. Nikki, could you explain that process for those that are new?
Sure. So what I'm presenting to today are proposed changes and requesting your approval to move forward in the process, which would be to publish them in the Division of State Documents produces the Maryland Register, which satisfies the requirement for public notice. There's a 30-day public comment period where we can collect those comments. We have to bring them back to you for final adoption. And we do that after the 30-day comment period. If we receive any comments, we summarize them for you and provide you with the actual comments. And then they're before you for final adoption, in which case you can approve them as published, and then we resubmit them for publication for final notice in the Maryland Register. You can make non-substantive changes, approve them with non-substantive changes. Andrea has to certify that those changes are non-substantive. Or you can say, no, we're gonna go back and restart. And so those are your three options, not today, but the next time we bring these back, those would be your options after there's been the opportunity for the public to comment. What we try to do, and we did with this one, is the Maryland Association of Election Officials has a regulation committee. And so I ran these by them so that if the local election officials have any feedback, that we've captured that before I even present them to you. Because of course their feedback is super important, and we want to capture that not really during the public comment period. We want it before I present them to you. So we've done a little bit of that. That's the unofficial part that we do. But these are before you to present as proposed and for publication.
And isn't there one other stage where it actually go to the legislature for their comment?
They have the legislative committee, the AELR, Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review Committee, has the opportunity to provide comment on the regulations. For regulations that are in the normal process, for emergency regulations, they actually have an up and down vote. But because these are being adopted permanently in the slower process, then they have the opportunity to comment, but their approval is not required.
Okay. I hope that makes more sense to everybody, because I know especially our three newer board members haven't been through that process yet. So this is stage one, where we're approving for the first 30-day publication in the Maryland Register. And then so what the staff would do for the other part, for the definitions, is they would bring us that proposal, let's call it the September meeting, and then we would tentatively approve that as long as everyone agreed, and then that would be published, and somewhere around 90 to 120 days later, it would enter Maryland code. Any questions on that from anybody on the board? So because I don't think, and Andrea, please stop me if this is inappropriate, but since there doesn't seem to be any specific then problems with any of these 6 legislative changes, or COMAR changes, sorry, I would entertain a motion to accept all 6 as presented.
So moved.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a
I defer
second.
to
Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of accepting the 6 regulatory changes as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, it passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, yeah, I think, well, just as a comment, building off what Sky mentioned, that as I guess a slightly younger attorney, I pulled up on Westlaw, my version of the election law article, and they meant in, I guess, 9-301, and they must have revised it last year to say, to codify the language saying that absentee ballot shall be referred to as mail-in ballots in all communications. And so I think that would be a good place for Nikki, or the next draft in the September that we look at for COMAR update, to build off of that and reference that.
Great. Thank you.
It helps to have a younger lawyer with.
I don't know how to use a book.
I play one on TV. Does that count? So I believe we're done number 7, which had replaced number 8. So we are now moving to number 9, which is approval of departmental legislative proposals, which again, everyone has via email. Is that going to be Jared?
Yes, thank you. So, thank you, Chair. So in front of you is 2 proposed departmental bills. The first one was approved last year, which protects contributors' information on the website and on campaign finance report. This bill is modeled after federal campaign legislation and basically prevents individuals or businesses for using that information, which we have to publicly disclose for commercial solicitations. The bill passed the Senate last year, but failed to pass in the House on sine die. This bill has been proposed in the past for the past 2 sessions, and it was passed in the truncated legislative session by the House and didn't get through the Senate because of the sine die issues, the one where they ended session early due to COVID. So this is just another attempt to bring this one back. I'll be happy to answer any questions on it. The other proposed bill combines a couple of previously approved departmental bills into more of one comprehensive enforcement bill, and it also adds new civil enforcement provisions for the state board. So in the past, the board has approved increasing the statute of limitations on election law article offenses from 3 to 4 years. That has passed in one form or another, one of the houses, but have failed to make it through. Additionally, the other portion of this was on Title 14 and allowing the state prosecutor to seek civil penalties against entities in violation of Title 14. This would help, especially with late fee violations and moving forward on their prosecutions. This basically, the state prosecutor's office wants express authority in this matter here, similar to the method and manner that is proposed under Title 13. When Title 14 was amended for the newer members on the board in 2013, they made it so that the late fees were to be processed by the same board, by the state board in the same method and manner as a political committee, and also tied the penalties provisions directly to it. However, we've always interpreted this to include that the state prosecutor can seek civil penalties. They just want to make sure that they have that ability here. And once again, this has passed one house or the other house in the last 2 years or so. And it was last year, it was this part was introduced late as an amendment to the statute of limitations bill in the Senate, and then it stayed in committee because it was just a timing issue here. Finally, the new provisions of the enforcement legislation focuses on entities that employ a lobbyist and make applicable contributions. This is in the general supervision articles. And basically, it mandates that an entity has to maintain certain records similar to the provisions that are in Title 13 and in Title 14 filers. And it grants the state board civil authority over those technical violations, again, similar to the provisions that we have in Title 13. The state prosecutor's office supports this because it allows them to seek civil penalties and focus on greater, I would say, investigations, while allowing the state board to seek penalties on more technical violations that as you've seen in my administrator's report there, just tell you like small penalties for, basically very objective standards there. And I, moving forward, both the state prosecutor's office and state ethics commissions have been informed of these bills. And support the provisions that touch their respective areas there. So with that, I move it forward for your approval. And before, I just also wanted to mention too, I've been working with MAYOV, the Maryland Association of Election Officials, on a bill for them as well to allow them to have the ability to open up and process absentee ballots prior to Election Day. And that bill will be presented to you. They're meeting tomorrow for its final approval, and I'll present that bill to you at your next meeting in September. But they may talk to you about it at the conference. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Great, thank you very much, Jared. What I'd like to do is we have two different bills here, right? And one has, I believe in your synopsis, has 8 different items it's changing. So let's start with Bill 1, and that is the article on election law 13-106, summary of Bill number 1. Are there any questions or comments about the bill, supporting the bill, allowing to be presented for 13-106?
Nope.
So I have one question for you there. What's the penalty?
That would go under the general penalties for that, and that's in Title 16 of the election law article. So it would just be one of the general penalties in violation of the title.
Part of the thing is, if the penalty is, let's say it's a $2,000 penalty, it's a pretty cheap price to buy the list.
Well, yes, but this would be under Title 13. So let me amend that. I'm sorry. It wouldn't be under Title 16. It would be a Title 13 penalty. So the civil violation could be up to $5,000, and if it's criminal, up to $25,000.
Would you consider this criminal?
It would depend if you did it knowingly, intentionally, and willfully.
Okay. That was my only questions, because I agree with, I have no problem agreeing that we shouldn't be taking people's data and allowing it to be used for commercial purposes. I just want to make sure we're not creating something that it just becomes well, that's a $2,000 fine. So, a list costs more than $2,000. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, this is actually referring to data that's already public. So these are the contributor reports that get published on the MD Chris website. If I want to find out who donated to a campaign, it's all there. This would be parallel to what federal law does. This would impose restrictions on people who obtain that data that's already publicly available. So that those lists are free. You and I can get them right now without paying a cent. It
Right.
just imposes restrictions on what you could do with them.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other questions there? Let's see if there's questions on the other one, because we can also do these as a unit if everybody is in agreement. Are there any questions on summary of Bill number 2? And you can certainly, if you have questions or comments, you can drill down to one of the 8 changes. Are there any questions or comments about Bill 2? Well, seeing none, and I have no questions on Bill 2, does anybody have an issue with voting on these bills together? So the chair would entertain a motion to approve the departmental legislative proposals as presented for presentation to the legislature.
So moved.
Is there a second? You all are shy.
Second.
And there's a second.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. All those obviously there's been no discussion, so we will move to a vote. All those in favor of the two motions, the two departmental legislative proposals as presented signify by saying aye.
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 I'm sorry, Justin, I didn't see if you voted or not.
Aye.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to catch it all to make sure. That means there's no nays. It's passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Demarinis. And I think you're still up, right? You're
Yes, I am.
Title 13 and then Title 14.
Right, exactly. So I just want, for the new members of the board here, these are waivers for late fees. These are late fees that are assessed when committees, these are for political committees that file their campaign finance reports late. These deadlines are statutory. Every committee has notice of this. We have to send out pre-report notices to each officer and candidate about 10 to 20 days prior to the report is due. The report is also always, when they log into the system, the next report is due is always in their reminder screen on there. And if after they fail to file the report timely, we send out a late fee notice to them, basically almost immediately after the report is due, like within a week, basically reminding the committees that they have not filed their reports and late fees are running. After that, we send out bills to them saying how much you owe due to the how late it is. We usually send out 1 to 2 bills. And then the last notice we send out to them is a notice to show cause letter, which basically is about a month or so after when the report is due, saying that they either have to submit a waiver, pay the fine, or the matter will be referred to the state prosecutor's office. So these are individual committees and officers that have some sort of circumstances that they would seek a waiver of the report and why they filed it late. The committee does not have, the board does not have to do any actions on rejections. They just have to approve waiver requests. So we put in the denials for your edification. Additionally, on the memo there, we kind of just tell you how much we've collected to date to show you how much is currently going on. Just to let you know, you're not going to get a lot. Usually during these, I would say, non-reporting periods, they usually come in, they trickle in. They're usually for either issues that we've already done with the state prosecutor, or they're trying to close out their committee. When there's a report that is due, usually the month thereafter, you'll see a bunch in there. You'll see more volume at that point there. So here, just to move forward with you, is waiver requests here. There are, we had 2 denials, and we have approximately there are 7 for your approval here. And I usually do not go through each individual report for you, but for you just to
How many were for? I thought it was, I counted 4 on this.
I'm sorry, yes, 4. I was counting pages by mistake, so.
Okay.
Yes, so I present to you the 4 with our recommendation for waiver approval. And if there's any sort of questions, I'll be happy to answer any one individually.
Does any board member have any questions or concerns about any of the approvals or denials of the late fee request, the late fee abatement requests?
There's a question, Mr. Chair, thanks, Jared. Not that it's my intent, but do we have the authority to overrule the denial if we wanted to vote on that?
They have the ability, the board, the political committee has the ability to ask for a reconsideration And then we bring that in front of the board, regardless of that it was denied in the first place. So if the committee, sometimes the committee then supplies additional information as to it, or there's some other reasons why denials occur, such as they never filed their report but have maxed out on the fees. We deny that because we still want the report in, because that's the disclosure and the compliant element, and we would then present reconsiderations in front of the board. So the committee does have a second opportunity to appeal a denial.
So the board, our board then, or denial becomes the appeal body.
Yes.
Great. Any other questions? Very good question, just because I didn't really know that, how that part worked. Any other questions or concerns? So seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the 4 waiver requests under Title 13 late fee request as presented.
Moved. Yeah. So
moved.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second, Justin.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Passes unanimously. So moving on to Title 14.
Yes,
request.
thank you. So again, this is a little bit different. So in Title 13, those are political committees, and the responsible officers are usually volunteers. Title 14 is the persons doing public business provision of the law. So this is, as you know, they have to file reports twice a year, every 6 months. And so what you have, and they're due in May and in November. These are entities that have contracts, a contract of $200,000 or more with a government entity. They have to disclose their political givings for that 6-month period. And they have to do that regardless of whether they had any or had more than, whatever they wanted to do. So this is a little bit different because this is a part of their contractual obligations. It's in every RFP that the state issues that they have to submit these reports here. So I mention this because prior boards have deemed this to be a little bit stricter of a standard because this is companies that usually have attorneys. This was written in contract law for them. So, and that this is, a statewide contractual obligation for them to file. Just why we are a little bit stricter for this. Again, denials do not have to go in front of the board, but waivers do. And this one here, we had, usually we deny a lot and then allow them to either seek more information or not. So we had 17 denials and only one that would be for granting, and that is in front of you here due to health-related issues. And so I present that to you.
So we have the Title 14 late fee waiver request, as you see in front of you, that was mailed out in advance. We have one that is being presented for approval to grant. It says grant reduced, but actually this is a granting. And then there are 17 denials. Are there any questions or concerns about the Title 14 waivers?
Question, Mr. Chair and Jared. And again, this is also probably based on my experience. What is the timing of the waiver request? I'm looking at some of these, memo pages you prepared, and I see the request was made in 2020, December sometimes. So is there a lag, or you collect them all and then at some?
Yes, some of them are just a little bit, and we don't bring them up because there might be 1 or 2 denials, and so we'll just wait and show them when we have a bunch to show. But they've already been notified of their denial,
and so they have 30 days or whatever to do their reconsideration or request for.
Exactly.
Great question. So, is there any other discussion or questions about the Title 14 waiver request? Should make that plural. There's one to consider. Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to grant the Title 14 late fee waiver as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Great, 100%. It goes through unanimously, and that is complete. Thank you very much, Jared. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, and not to prolong the meeting any further, because it looks like we've made it through pretty much all of our business. But I just wanted to say in response to Jared's comment about the Title 14 waiver request perhaps being under a heightened scrutiny, for lack of a better term. And that has been seems to be the policy or philosophy of the state boards over the years. I just wanted to say that makes sense to me. I don't think we have to, affirmatively state at any point whether we're taking strict or liberal approaches to things. But I think that does make sense. I mean, these are corporations that have contracts. There are requirements under those contracts, and the notes that Jared puts or the other staff put in these waiver requests and why they are perhaps more likely to be denied than under Title 13. These are companies that some of which appear to have a pattern in practice of not getting their reports in on time. They've been doing this. I mean, they've been in this business for a long time, and ignorance is no excuse, we say in the law. And so I just wanted to make sure that, my personal philosophy as a board member is that if Title 14 requests are more stringently scrutinized than Title 13, that makes sense to me because of the nature of the business, the nature of what the law requires, and what would presumably be a level of sophistication on the part of the corporations and businesses that are doing business and have certain requirements that come with that. Again, they have the opportunity and the privilege to do business with the state, and this is not that difficult of a thing to comply with.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woodley. Appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, before you move on, I think we skipped over the confidentiality request form. Linda, this is Donna. Yes. I'm sorry that was not on the agenda. So yes, I was going to add it under new business if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. I do have the memorandum and the form, and we will do that under new business.
Thank you.
No problem. So are there any other questions or any other statements about the late fee waivers in any way, 14 or 13? Seeing none, we'll move to old business. Is there any old business to consider? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. And we do have one piece of new business, which you do have in your emails. There's a memorandum about the confidentiality request form. Who will be speaking to that from the staff?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. This is Mary. And I apologize. I got the form a little bit too late for Donna for the agenda, but she got it to you and I appreciate that. So you requested that we be we do a note to individuals requesting confidentiality that they will not receive certain notifications. So I will read the note that you all, I believe, have highlighted. So note, when a voter record is designated confidential, there are several voter services that become unavailable to that voter. The voter's voter registration information will not be available on our voter lookup website, and the voter will not receive ballot status email update or a sample ballot mailing. So that I believe captured everything that the board requested we would want. There are a couple of other tweaks that we did. We just made it so that the individual making the request would only provide the month and day of birth. And then we simply made it that it's an election board, because we get those requests at the state board level. So it's just generic that it is an election board. And then, Jared, I will allow you to speak to, we've narrowly focused it on the candidacy, correct?
Yes, that is correct, right? That, you know, they can change that their candidacy, basically for traditional candidates, that they don't have to, that it's their certificate of candidacy, which is a public record, that their residential address is confidential there. And also, we've added that checkbox for the immediate family members that live in their homes to receive confidential status as well, if the individual is eligible for confidential status. So you couldn't do an end around and figure it out. Oh, so-and-so is the spouse of a judge or a person being threatened, and try to seek that way as well.
Thank you, Jared, because I did not highlight that. So thank you, Jared.
Okay, does any board member have questions or concerns?
So I guess question, maybe I missed this, I'm sorry, the audio cut out. Are we asked to review the highlighted portions are changes to the existing form, or just reviewing the form overall?
It would be the form.
I believe it's approving the form. And again, Mr. Williams, I'm sorry that last checkbox I did not highlight. That is new regarding the immediate family member, but it is approving the form as presented to you.
So any other questions on the board? I have just a couple. First of all, I think that the spacing on the checkbox for judge is not matching up to its description on the right-hand side. I think it's a one-line difference. And then I'm just trying to get, and it's probably, I'm just not thinking properly because we've had a long meeting here. My request for confidentiality is based on my candidacy for public office, and I'm saying yes or no. Is this is an additional question? I mean, if you've checked off that you're a person being threatened, you're still answering that question? If you checked off that you're a victim, are you still answering? I'm trying to understand what's the question for?
So the question is basically, so the first part is making sure that your voter registration is confidential. The other part is to signify to the candidacy division, we need to go in and make sure that their candidacy records are also then deemed confidential.
Correct. So I'm a judge running for office. I'm confidential. I want to make sure that my candidacy information is as well.
Okay, now I understand the intent.
Jared, this is Andrea. I'm a little bit concerned that the way it's written might lead somebody to believe that candidacy for public office or serving as an officer of a political campaign is itself a basis for requesting confidentiality. And I understand you to mean that that's not the case, but the way it's written to say that my request for confidentiality is based on my candidacy seems to imply that. And I wonder if that could be written just to say, I am a candidate for public office or an officer of a political campaign, check, yes or no. That way, it's not sort of implying that there's another basis for asserting confidentiality, but gives you the information you need to be able to go into those records and redact.
That's fine. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, because when I read this as this is another reason why
Right.
you could request a private record.
So, yeah, I think that change is fine. Mary, I have no objections to that.
So,
I don't.
might we suggest taking this to University of Baltimore?
No.
So,
No, I'm sorry to be abrupt, but you know, Jared and I are getting these requests every day. And I get the requests that have been made, but I'm sorry, that was really rude and I apologize. So I will defer to Linda and Nikki on that request.
I think there are a couple changes that we need to make.
Yeah, I mean, the one is super easy, just making the checkbox for judge line up to the right-hand column. But this other one, I'd like to see how it reads. I don't know if we want to try to do that now and come up with something on how it reads. Would you like to do that? If this is an emergent situation?
Sure, I guess like it would just be like, I guess for the my request part there would just be like, I am a candidate for public office or serving as an officer of a political committee or both, circle 1. So it's still the appropriate category there. And then we would just be able to know that they are a candidate for as well, for that they would want their records, their candidacy records to be designated as confidential as well.
So you're proposing that it would be edited by taking out my request for confidentiality is based on my
Right.
candidacy, and it would say I am a candidate
For public office.
or serving as an office of a political campaign or both, and
Right.
would like my, or what
You don't
is-
even need that part there because it's already a part of the first part up there with I request that my residential address and telephone number contained in my candidacy records. It's already up in the first paragraph there. So
Okay.
this is just kind of just letting us know.
We are gonna need to pull this back.
Sure.
And talk about getting texts out to voters, that type of thing, under that new legislation.
So are you asking to pull this back and resubmit with those other changes as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So does anybody else have a problem with that or have any other issues or anything else to discuss on this form? So then we would probably not be meeting again until September. So is that all right?
We could.
Can I ask Andrea a question? So the form that we currently have up, we're still allowed to use that form, correct?
I think if the board doesn't approve a new form, then you have to use the current form that you have. I think that's the.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
So we will have this as an agenda item in our next meeting and look forward to viewing and approving a form that meets all the new guidelines and those couple little changes. Okay, is there any other new business? Seeing none, any disclosure of campaign contributions? Seeing none, we move to schedule the next meeting. So for 2 reasons, I would like to not use our traditional Thursday for the September meeting. Number one, we will not be having an August meeting. So often we will have that next month's meeting in an occasion like this a little earlier in that month. And I am not available on the 23rd of September. I will be traveling. So for those two reasons, we wanted to move it a little earlier in the month. The 16th of the month is actually Yom Kippur, so we cannot do it on that. Well, that would start sundown of Wednesday, I think. Isn't that correct? So the 16th is unavailable. So we're considering the 9th of September. Does anybody have a problem with 2 p.m. on September 9th? Does 2 p.m. on September 9th work for all here? I've already cleared that day with the staff.
Yes, it works for me.
Great. So we will be, the next meeting would then be September 9th at 2 p.m. And that would be, the biennial is in August. So we would not be having a meeting in August, but we would meet again on September 9th.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I apologize for being a little late to this, but I am not available on the afternoon of September 9th. But as in the past, we've had another, one of my colleagues sit in for me. I brief them on the issues, and they're able to provide advice as needed during the meeting. So if that's not a problem with you all, I'm fine going that approach as we've done in the past.
That works for me. Does anybody else have any issues with that? Although we far greater prefer you, Mr. Trento, for obvious reasons. So,
For my planning, do we think that would be an in-person meeting?
I think that I will defer to the staff about that. I know that you all, right now, the staff has a rotating schedule to not have too many people in the building, and they are being very watchful of this new strain. Am I misspeaking that at all, either Linda or Nikki? So then we would assume then that September meeting would still be all virtual. Is that correct? And then we would use, maybe triggered out of that meet. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, because some people would want to come in virtual and some would want to be there in person. I don't believe we have, from our report earlier in the administrator's report, we don't have the necessary software to affect that hybrid meeting. Is that also correct?
Yeah, we're still figuring that out.
Okay, so until that happens, it's a very good question, Mr. Williams, thank you. But we would be virtual on the September meeting at least. So, and then we would have a fill-in assistant attorney. We'll make sure he knows he's a fill-in. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure he's a fine person as well. So we are now getting ready to go into closed session, and I'm going to read our script for closed session and entertain a motion to do that. I do want to say that we will not be coming back to our open session. We will close now. There's no further business today to conduct. We've been through all of the business on the schedule, including old and new business. So we would be closing from closed session. So there's no need to stay on here or come back here. We will not be coming back to open session. So the board will now consider whether to meet in closed session to discuss the compensation of employees over whom the board has salary setting authority as permitted under section 3-305, section B and 1 of the general provisions article. This exemption applies to a discussion among the board, members of the board regarding a personnel matter that affects a specific individual. Meeting in closed session will allow the members of the board to be briefed on personnel matters and share their views without compromising the confidentiality of those discussions. Number 2, we will consult with counsel to obtain legal advice and obtain information from staff about pending or potential litigation as permitted by section 3-305B, number 7 and 8 of the general provisions article. Meeting in closed session will allow the members of the board to seek and obtain legal advice with board counsel without waiver of the attorney-client privilege and obtain information from staff about pending or potential litigation. May I have a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 So we are unanimously
Aye.
voting the motion having passed. The board will meet in closed session in accordance with exemptions B, 1, 7, and 8 of section 3-305 of the Open Meetings Act. We would convene, how about 10 minutes? How about at 4:40? Does that work for everybody?
Sounds good.
We'll have a 10-minute break and convene in closed session, of which you have the link, at 4:40.